think some people might say that it is important to publish during your PhD, but I think it's only important to publish if you've got something worth saying and you've got something new to add to the conversation. And you have to be really confident in what you're putting out there. In the first 6 months of my PhD, I submitted to a journal, and I submitted a paper that when my supervisors looked at it, they said, you shouldn't be putting this out there. And that really knocked my confidence. And so I think actually rushing to publish can almost have a worse effect than not publishing at all. Rather than rushing to publish, I think the things that have helped me is doing more presentations at conferences, or also not just at research conferences, but going to speak to people external out of the university to whom your research might be relevant.
So I don't think it's important to publish during the PhD, and here's why. So to me personally, the journey of doing a PhD, the aim of the PhD is to complete a PhD, not to publish. I would definitely advise people that if there is an opportunity to publish, to really think about it, because it's great. As we know, if you start looking at employment past the PhD, a lot of employers will ask about publications. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to publish, I don't think personally. But the aim of the PhD shouldn't be to publish. The aim of the PhD should be to close the gap in research, to enable people to live a better life, to improve quality of life, to add to the pool of research and knowledge, not to publish. I think we can always publish once we finish that PhD, but I personally think that publishing as part of the main aim shouldn't be to publish.
I think it's important, if you've got the time that you can warrant to try and spend publishing, that you do that. But I don't think it should be your priority during your PhD. I think your PhD should be your priority. And I think that gets lost for a lot of people, actually. There's a lot going on when you're doing it, but you should try and prioritise completing your PhD first. If you've got time and your supervisors can support that, then try and publish as you go along. I don't think it's important that you've published by the time you get to your Viva.
To me, I think it's really important to do publication. This is basically like a documentation of your PhD and telling people what steps you've been up to. And for like scientific research or like autism research, I would say it's probably quite important for you to get things done and publish it immediately, because there are quite a lot of competitors out there who are doing more or less the same thing. If you don't get things done first, then you are basically like, you can't publish that paper anymore. Someone else already did.
Because I'm just a student with not much experience, I don't know how important it is to study, but I'm certainly being given the impression that it is quite important, just because of how often it's mentioned to me through the administrative systems, through my supervisors, through other PhD students, etc.
It may be important to do it as you go along, while it's still fresh in your mind. So you've written a chapter, perhaps your systematic review, for example. It's still fresh in your mind. You've turned it into a paper, and it gets accepted for publication, and that's great. So you publish as you go along. Is it important? I don't actually know. I'm sure publication is important, and the more you publish, maybe the better it will reflect on you. But I'm sure it would just be as important if you had written the thesis, and then once that was out of the way, you then transformed your chapters into journals, articles, and got them published that way. I suppose that would be equally as important.
It can be useful to publish during your PhD, but I don't think it's really that important. Your mental health is much more important, and finishing your PhD is more important than getting a few publications out. Although if you are looking for...
the importance of publishing while during your PhD, yes, I do believe it's important to publish during your PhD. But as I said before, it's about prioritising. I think the priority is completing your PhD and getting your doctorate. If you can publish along that way, that's brilliant. But I would say publishing and then not achieving your PhD would be a disaster.
I mean, if we're pressured to publish, yeah, we're Well, I think it depends on your supervisor. And I have some friends that are doing PhD here. Their supervisors give them, you know, deadlines to do publications. But I've never been like pushed. I'm the one always saying, look, I've not done any publication. Hey, I need to do something.
I've never felt a pressure to publish since I started my PhD. I know that other students do, and I think that can quite often be linked to where their funding is coming from, or whether they're affiliated with a particular research study. I know that having chosen my own PhD subject has given me a lot more freedom because I feel much more in control.
I definitely feel that PhD students have a pressure to publish, huge pressure. And I think specifically now in this moment in time, we have the REF coming up, so I don't know if that applies to all institutions across the world, but I know that the research excellence framework, I know that there's a huge pressure for the institution, and that translates from the institution to the researchers, the staff, and from the staff down to the PhD students. I think everyone that I've spoken to has faced some sort of pressure to publish, especially at the moment.
There's a big pressure to publish at the minute in my area of my PhD purely because of REF. But I also think fortunately for me, there's a bigger pressure for completion, because I know that counts towards REF as well. I think the biggest pressure to publish comes from the employment afterwards. You almost think getting a PhD is this final tick box to get a job, and as soon as you start applying, you realise that you then can't tick that box that says you've not published. So as much as you feel like you got really lucky and you're one in however many that have managed to get themselves to a PhD, if you've not got those publications, then you kind of second grade to everyone else that has got a PhD. So I don't think it's necessarily just the pressure from the university to publish, but actually realising that you need more than just a PhD to then go on and use it and get a job.
Yes, about publishing, I think it could be a pressure for all of us because of like your supervisors or like just the university. You might want to get some exposure or some awareness from other journals or anyone else that is not within your setting. And it could be sometimes very frustrating when you keep hearing like, oh, I need to publish a paper, or your supervisor asking you, when will you get things done, because we are going to meet this deadline for this publication. It could be quite stressful sometimes, but I guess this is a part of the journey that we have to go through.
I think so, yes. I think we can get pressured into publishing. If I think about my work, quite often I will do something, I will write something, and the first thing my supervisor says, oh yeah, we could make this into a short communication, or oh, we could publish this. And I mean, even through the university administrative systems, you're supposed to update them yearly on how you're disseminating your work. So there is quite a bit of pressure behind us, I think.
I'm not sure if there is a pressure to publish. I assume there is, and I know PhD students who have, but I haven't felt those pressures personally. Now, there has been talk of me publishing some papers, and I went on a writing retreat yesterday organised by my supervisor to work on a paper, but it wasn't a pressured atmosphere, and I don't feel the pressure. When you start your PhD, you have to write a publication and dissemination plan, talking about conferences you'll go to, and what you'll publish and when, and in maybe what types of journals. But even though it's been suggested and talked about, it's in more of an exciting way.
There can be a lot of pressure into publishing your PhD, but you do have to remember that it's not the be-all and end-all of your PhD, and it doesn't have to be published. You need to do it your way, and that's the way that it will get done best.
Yes, I do, and I've realised that this year. It wasn't so much I felt pressured into publishing, but I forgot that aspect of it. Again, it goes back to priorities. For me, with work and PhD and my academic capabilities, getting a PhD might be a stretch, might be the limit for me. So introducing the other factor of getting published along the way, while I feel it is important, it might not be a priority for me